The air inside the courtroom was heavy, charged like a thunderstorm about to break. Every eye was fixed on Jasmine Crockett as she stood, her voice steady but alive with fire. The marble walls seemed to lean closer, as if they too were listening. Judge Richard Leon, notorious for his piercing glare, had just thrown a question meant to rattle her, to strip her of composure in front of a watching world. He leaned back in his chair, certain the silence would expose her as unprepared. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She lifted her chin, locked eyes with the bench, and began. Her first words sliced through the stillness like a blade, calm, deliberate, undeniable. Gasps rippled through the gallery as her sentences unfolded, each one sharper, stronger, bolder than the last. She was no longer simply defending herself, she was challenging the very weight of authority pressing down on her. The reporters scribbled furiously, their pens barely keeping pace. A man in the second row whispered to his neighbor, "Did she just say that to a federal judge?" But Jasmine didn't pause to absorb the shock she had caused. She kept going, each line crafted like a hammer striking the lies and assumptions stacked against her. Judge Leon's expression tightened. His lips curled just slightly into the faintest smirk, the look of a man confident that his authority would soon restore control. Yet his fingers tapped the armrest of his chair, betraying a flicker of unease. Jasmine's words were not those of someone cowed by power. They were the words of someone who understood that truth, once spoken aloud, could shake pillars far sturdier than oak and stone. By the time she delivered her final line, the room had fallen into an almost unnatural quiet. It was the kind of silence that follows a lightning strike, when everyone waits for the rumble of thunder. But there was no thunder. Just her words, echoing in the minds of everyone present, daring them to reckon with the courage they had just witnessed. And then the question hung in the air, what would Judge Leon say now? But what she said next didn't just silence the courtroom, it stunned the entire nation. For years, Judge Richard Leon had built a reputation as the immovable wall of Washington's judiciary. Lawyers who faced him spoke of his court as a place where words were not just weighed, but weaponized. He was feared for his blunt rulings, his sharp tongue, and the way he could dismantle even seasoned attorneys with a single raised eyebrow. His bench was more than oak and leather. It was a stage where he played the role of unchallenged authority, and most who entered bowed under the weight of his gaze. Jasmine Crockett knew this reputation. Everyone in that courtroom knew it. She wasn't supposed to shine in that arena. She wasn't supposed to command the silence of the room. She was expected to falter, to stumble, to leave looking smaller than when she arrived. That was the trap. Leon's questions weren't random. They were crafted like snares, designed to corner her, to turn her own words into weapons against her. He had done it before, and the legal world expected he would do it again. But what the country hadn't counted on was Jasmine's resolve. She wasn't just an attorney or a politician in that moment. She was the embodiment of every person who had been underestimated, spoken over, or told they didn't belong. She carried with her the weight of communities who had fought for a seat at the table only to be told their presence was a mistake. And here she was, facing down the man whose entire persona rested on making others bend. The stakes could not have been higher. To the casual observer, it may have looked like a simple courtroom exchange, but beneath the surface, something seismic was unfolding. If Leon succeeded in dismantling her, the message would ripple far beyond those walls, that the system still belonged to the old guard, and voices like Jasmine's were temporary intrusions. Yet, if she held her ground, if she outmaneuvered him with truth and composure, it would be proof, undeniable, replayable, unforgettable proof, that dignity could not be crushed under the weight of arrogance. The journalists sensed it. Their pens scratched harder, faster. Cameramen adjusted their lenses, hungry for the moment when history might unfold in front of them. Even the clerk sitting behind the bench leaned forward just slightly, as if straining to catch every syllable. It was no longer just a legal proceeding. It was a test of who would control the narrative of justice itself. And in that high-stakes moment, Jasmine's words became more than personal defense. They became a mirror, reflecting the clash between two Americas, one built on hierarchy and intimidation, and another struggling to carve space for courage, equality, and truth. The energy in the room shifted. The trap that Leon had set seemed suddenly less certain, less inevitable. For the first time, people were not watching to see how he would dismantle her. They were watching to see how long she could hold her fire, how far she would push before he pushed back. Every second stretched, every glance exchanged became a drumbeat of suspense. What none of them knew, not even Judge Leon himself, was that Jasmine was about to turn the tables in a way that would echo far beyond the courtroom. What happens in the next 5 minutes would be replayed across every platform in America. Richard Leon was not born into obscurity, nor was he the type of man who slipped quietly into his role. From the moment he entered public life, he carried himself with the swagger of someone certain he belonged among the gatekeepers of power. His career had been long, winding through decades of courtrooms and high-profile cases, each one cementing his reputation as a man unafraid to bare his teeth. To many in Washington, Leon was the archetype of the hard-line federal judge, unbending, sharp, almost theatrical in the way he commanded his courtroom. He prided himself on being the figure who would not be swayed by public opinion or political winds. His supporters painted him as principled, a man of the law above all else. But to those who had stood before him, that principle often came wrapped in condemnation, the kind of withering tone that could reduce a young attorney to silence in a matter of seconds. In one case, a public defender recalled, Leon dismissed an argument with a single mocking question that drew laughter from the gallery. To him, it was sharp wit. To others, it was humiliation cloaked in judicial robes. His critics accused him of leaning too heavily toward the powerful, of showing leniency in cases where corporations or elites were involved, while crushing ordinary defendants with the full weight of the law. He denied the charge, insisting that his only allegiance was to the Constitution. Yet the pattern was difficult to ignore. The powerful often walked away lighter, the powerless often left bruised. And there was something else, arrogance, not hidden, but worn like a medal. He relished the aura of intimidation. For Leon, control was not just a requirement of the bench, it was the performance. His words carried the cadence of a man who believed he alone held the line between order and chaos, as if without his hand on the scales, the entire system would collapse into disorder. This reputation was both his armor and his weapon. Journalists covering his cases often noted how he appeared to enjoy the spotlight, how he leaned into the image of the uncompromising judge. He liked being the story, the one who cut through arguments with a blunt finality that left no room for debate. That persona, carefully cultivated over decades, made him formidable and dangerous to anyone who dared challenge him. Yet even in his strength lay his weakness, for beneath the iron mask of authority was a man who had rarely been confronted by someone unwilling to yield. Most attorneys avoided clashing with him head-on, fearing the consequences. They played the game by his rules, tiptoeing around his temper, hoping to survive without attracting his ire. Leon thrived in that environment, feeding on the fear that he inspired, which is why Jasmine Crockett's presence that day was so electrifying. She did not fit the mold of those who usually stood before him. Young, bold, unafraid, she represented a different America, one not impressed by his carefully constructed aura. And though Leon sat high above, draped in the authority of his robe, something in his demeanor betrayed expectation. He thought this would be another easy moment of authority, another opportunity to remind the nation why his name carried weight. He was wrong. Because what Leon had not calculated was the effect of facing someone who had walked through fire long before stepping into his courtroom. Jasmine had faced dismissal, prejudice, and belittlement her entire career.
Unlike the others, she wasn't here to avoid confrontation. She was here to meet it head-on with a calm ferocity that could not be shaken by glares or smirks. And as the seconds ticked by, Leon's greatest strength, his cultivated arrogance, began to transform into his greatest liability. For arrogance, when confronted with dignity, does not expand, it shrinks. The more he attempted to assert control, the more her composure illuminated the fragility of his power. The clash was inevitable. Everyone in that courtroom could sense it, even if they couldn't see it yet. The reputation of Judge Richard Leon, the immovable wall of Washington's justice, was about to meet an unstoppable force. And in that collision, only one of them would emerge with their legend intact. Long before she stood beneath the towering gaze of Judge Richard Leon, Jasmine Crockett had been learning how to fight. Not with fists.
Her words had reminded people that no voice is too small, no speaker too unimportant to call power to account. That is the essence of democracy, not the silence of the many, but the courage of the one. Across the country, those who had watched her stand tall against the glare of Judge Leon took something with them, a belief that dignity is not gifted by position or title, but earned by truth and upheld by courage. Parents told their children about the young attorney who spoke without trembling. Teachers replayed her words in classrooms, showing students that eloquence, paired with conviction, can bend even the sternest authority. And for those who had long felt silenced, Jasmine became proof that their voices too carried weight. That the moral arc of justice, so often spoken about in lofty phrases, bends only when ordinary people choose to stand, to speak, and to resist. The moral was not complicated, nor was it wrapped in legal jargon. It was simple, almost childlike in its clarity. Arrogance can demand silence, but dignity always finds a way to speak. Authority can command obedience, but truth commands respect. In the end, Jasmine didn't just defend herself. She defended an idea that no voice is too small to speak truth to power. And that idea, once spoken aloud, cannot be silenced. In the end, what lingered wasn't just the image of Judge Richard Leon sitting stunned in his own courtroom. It wasn't only the gasps, the silence, or even the headlines that declared Jasmine Crockett had delivered the moment of her career. What stayed with people was the unshakable composure of a woman who refused to be diminished. Leon's glare had carried the weight of decades of authority, but Jasmine's voice cut through it with the clarity of lived truth. That contrast, his shock, her calm, became the lasting picture. A reminder that even in halls built to intimidate, dignity can disarm arrogance. And yet, this story doesn't end inside those walls. It carries forward in every person who watched, shared, and felt something shift within themselves. Because Jasmine's stand wasn't just hers. It belonged to anyone who has ever felt talked over, dismissed, or underestimated, and dreamed of finding the courage to answer back. That's why stories like this matter. They remind us that power is never absolute, that voices once ignored can rise loud enough to echo across a nation. If you believe voices like Jasmine's need to be amplified, share this story. Pass it along. Let it spark conversations in living rooms, classrooms, and boardrooms. And if you want to be part of a community that refuses to be silenced, subscribe now, because silence is what authority counts on. But together, our voices, your voice, can ensure the next Jasmine doesn't just speak. She's heard. This is more than a courtroom drama. It's a call, a declaration, a choice. And the question that remains is simple.
When the moment comes, will you stay silent or will you speak?